Right, welcome and good afternoon, everyone. My name's Joe Dromey, and I'm the General Secretary of the Fabian Society, and we're a left-leaning think tank and membership organisation committed to building a stronger economy and a more equal society. I'm also just recovering from COVID, so excuse me if my voice is a little bit rough today. So this event will be exploring the findings of new Fabian Society research that is out today. In Levying Up, we explore the impact of the apprenticeship levy ahead of the reform of the levy, and we set out some changes that we believe we need to see in order to unleash growth and to unlock opportunity. We'll start by talking you through the findings of the report. We will then hear reflections from Lauren Edwards MP, and following that, we'll go into a panel session with experts on the skills system. So I'm just going to share my screen now, and I will take you through the findings of the report. Excellent. So before we kick off, I just want to say a big thank you to Youth Futures Foundation and to CIPD for supporting this work. And I'm really pleased that we're joined by both Barry Fletcher, the Chief Executive of Youth Futures Foundation, and Peter Cheese, Chief Executive of the CIPD, who will be joining the panel later. So I thought we'd start by setting out what the apprenticeship levy is and what the aims of the levy were. So the apprenticeship levy was announced by the then Chancellor George Osborne a decade ago, and it was introduced in 2017. So under the levy, large employers with a payroll bill of £3 million or more pay 0.5% of their payroll above that threshold into a digital account. And this funding can only be used to pay for the training or assessment costs of apprentices. The funds that are unspent by large employers are used to cover the majority of the cost of apprenticeships at non-levy paying SMEs. In terms of the aims of the apprenticeship levy, the government at the time set these out, and we've just got them on the right here. So the first was to meet the skills needs of employers, ensuring that the apprenticeship system better met their needs, to create progression opportunities for apprentices, to widen participation and boost social mobility, and to create more apprenticeships. Our report shows that the apprenticeship levy has failed to deliver on each of these aims, and that it's also failing to deliver on two of the government's key missions, boosting growth and tearing down barriers to opportunity. So we highlight three key challenges with the levy, with the first being that it's failed to address low levels of investment. So while the levy sought to create more apprenticeships, starts have actually declined by 31% since the levy was introduced. And as you can see on this graph, the decline has been driven by a huge decline at level 2, which is the grey bar at the bottom, with the number of level 2 starts down by almost 3/4 since 2016-17. There's also been a big decline in apprenticeship starts at SMEs. So the number of starts at small and medium-sized employers is down almost half since the levy came in. Indeed, SMEs account for 98% of the total decline in apprenticeship starts we've seen since 2016-17. Before the levy was introduced, employer investment in the UK was far too low. Indeed, that was part of the rationale behind the levy. And the amount that employers were investing in continuing vocational training per employee was half the EU average in the UK. Employer investment in skills, though, has continued to decline since the levy came in. So this graph shows data from the Employer Skills Survey, with the amount of investment falling by almost 10 billion in England in real terms between 2017 and the latest survey last year in 2024. And with investment and apprenticeship starts both declining, and we argue that the levy has failed to meet employer skills needs. So this graph shows the number of skills shortage vacancies in dark red and the number of employers with a skills shortage vacancy in light red. Skills shortage vacancies are jobs which are unfilled because of a lack of suitably skilled candidates applying. And what we can see is there's obviously a spike in 2022, which aligns with the unlocking of the economy post-COVID. But in 2024, the number of skills shortage vacancies was still almost a fifth higher than ahead of the introduction of the levy. So the levy's failed both to boost apprenticeship starts, to boost employer investment, or to meet employer skills needs. Secondly, as well as the amount of investment mattering, so too does the distribution of this investment. So who benefits from employer training? And the UK has long had a significant and stark inequality in access to training, with workers with a degree level qualification being 4 times as likely to have received job related training recently compared to those with no qualifications. But the levy seems to have exacerbated rather than addressed these inequalities, with those who could most benefit from access to training now being less likely to do so. So apprenticeship starts are down by over a third for young people, just as youth unemployment has increased. Starts at level 2, as I said, have fallen by almost 3/4. And at the same time, over £400 million is being invested in workers who already have a graduate level qualification. Over 400 million of levy funding going to people who are already well qualified. So this is a concern both in terms of opportunity, but also in terms of growth, because it is apprenticeships for younger workers and at level 2 and 3 that offer the best returns and the best value. With the previous government was notionally committed to levelling up, so to closing gaps between regions. But we've also seen a significant increase in regional inequalities. So this graph shows the change in apprenticeship starts by the kind of deprivation level of the neighbourhoods in which people are living. And what you can see is that people in the most deprived communities on the far left have seen a much greater decline in apprenticeship starts, so 4 times greater than people living in the least deprived communities. And there's a similar picture when we look at regional changes as well. So as you can see here, the decline in apprenticeship starts, which is the grey bar, is much higher in regions with lower levels of qualification among the workforce and lower levels of pay and productivity as well. So there's been a very significant decline of almost half in the northeast, and large declines in the Yorkshire and Humber and the northwest as well, and much lower declines in apprenticeship starts in London and the southeast, which have higher levels of qualification and higher pay and productivity. Finally, we argue that the levy is neither flexible nor is it strategic. So the levy offers limited flexibility for employers who are only able to spend their funds on apprenticeships. While these work very well for some employers, they are not always the best solution. And restricting the use of levy funds has led to lots of rebadging of training and to additional costs in the system. Secondly, there's no link between the levy and the industrial strategy, with no incentives for employers in the 8 priority sectors to invest in skills. Third, there's no link between the levy and immigration policy. And also, there's very limited flexibility for locally elected leaders to adapt the system to better meet local needs. So the Labour government's committed to reforming the apprenticeship levy into a growth and skills levy. They've said they'll offer employers more flexibility to invest their funds in other forms of high quality training. However, very little flexibility has been offered so far, and we argue that this is likely due to pressure on the apprenticeship budget. So last year, the apprenticeship budget was overspent for the first time, and offering employers additional flexibility without making other changes risks a greater overspend and a significant impact on the availability of funding for SMEs and potentially a decline in the number of apprenticeship starts. So the government faces some challenging policy choices. So our report sets out recommendations for the reform of the levy, which seeks to unleash growth and to unlock opportunity. And we set these out in 3 key areas. So the first is to boost investment in skills. So we call for the creation of an employer growth and skills fund, which would bring together all the revenue raised by the levy and also the immigration skills charge revenue as well, with the funds from these 2 revenue sources ring-fenced for employer investment in skills. We find that the levy has, since the levy was launched, some £4.5 billion of levy funding has been retained by the Treasury. And we also show that in 2023-24, over 600 million was raised by the immigration skills charge, notionally for investment in skills, but with no transparency in how that funding's used. Second, we called for the levy to be increased over time, up to 0.7% for larger employers. Our survey found levy payers are broadly open to this and are open to a potential increase in the levy in return for greater flexibility in how they can use their funds. We also call for the threshold to be reduced over time from the current level of 3 million to £1 million. This would triple the number of employers paying into their levy. It would give more medium-sized employers skin in the game, and it would help reverse the significant decline that we've seen in apprenticeship starts at SMEs in recent years. Taken together, the increase in the levy and lowering the threshold would raise an additional 2.5 billion by 2029-30, increasing the amounts raised by the levy by over half. And this would enable greater flexibility in how employers can use their funds and increase total investment as well. So the second series of recommendations are to rebalance investment. And that's because, as well as seeing overall a higher investment, we also need to address the significant inequality in access to training and ensure that those who can benefit most receive training. So we call for the levy funds to be restricted to non-graduates. So at the moment, over £400 million is spent on non-graduates. And restricting funds to non-graduates would save around £270 million in addition to the government's recently announced changes to Level 7 apprenticeships. It would redirect investment towards young people and toward those with lower levels of qualification. And as we said earlier on, these apprenticeships tend to have higher returns. We also call for a new apprenticeship grant for employers, which would offer SMEs £3,000 for every apprentice aged under 25. This would help reverse the decline that we've seen in apprenticeship starts at SMEs. And our polling found that employers said that this would be the most impactful measure to boost investment in young people. We call also for a apprenticeship grant for providers. So providers play a vital role in the system, but the introduction of the levy has incentivized them to focus on large levy-paying employers who have got levy funds to burn and capacity to take on a large number of apprentices. So we call for an apprenticeship grant for providers with £1,000 per apprenticeship start at SMEs to incentivize them to work with and support SMEs to invest in skills. Finally, we believe the growth and skills levy must be both more flexible and more strategic. So we call for employers to be given greater flexibility to use their funds on other high quality training. This was the most strongly supported measure in our poll of employers, with 7 in 10 saying that this would be a priority for them. Though obviously it would require additional funding in the levy in order to offer employers additional flexibility. We call for incentives to boost investment in industrial strategy sectors and other sectors crucial to the government's missions, such as construction and health and care. And we call for a link between skills policy and immigration, including through a £3,000 incentive for apprenticeship standards linked to the immigration salaries list, which highlights occupations where there are acute skills shortages in the UK workforce. And finally, we also call for a greater role for local leaders to flex the system to meet local needs, including through the piloting of a local apprenticeship fund. So that is the summary of the recommendations. We will now go to hear from Lauren Edwards, MP, for some initial reflections. So Lauren has been an MP for Rochester and Stroud since 2024, and she's the chair of the APPG on skills, careers and employment. So over to you, Lauren.
Thanks very much, Joe, and thank you everyone for coming along to hear about this fantastic report. I think it's my first time addressing a Fabian audience, which I'm quite excited about. So thank you very much for the warm welcome. I just talk briefly a little bit, I think, about how I see the apprenticeship levy as it's been currently working, and sort of drawing on my experience over the last year as a local MP. I think on all metrics, the apprenticeship levy, though well-intentioned, has failed, as Joe's presentation highlighted. business investment in skills is down, apprenticeship starts are down, and the skill shortages are up. So we need a pretty big overhaul. And one of the things I'm particularly conscious of as an MP that represents an area outside of a city centre, in Medway, where I'm based, where Rochester and Strood is, 90% of the businesses are all SMEs. And when I go around and speak to them on a weekly basis, it's very clear that they either didn't engage with the apprenticeship scheme, or they tried to and they felt quite scarred by that experience. And what I often hear, particularly for those that involve technical skills, they say, look, I prefer to take on a 15-year-old with a really good attitude straight out of school and kind of train them up in my business. And I say, well, that's great that you're, still giving people those opportunities. But that doesn't really help that young person to get a qualification that they can use more broadly, that might be tied. Sorry, Joe, did you want to come in? No.
No, sorry, that was an accident.
Oh,
Apologies.
that's all right. Sorry, I wasn't sure if there's a technical problem or maybe people couldn't hear me, but I thought I'd better check. um, so it's not really helping that young person. They might be learning technology tied to that business, ways of working tied to that business. So that approach isn't really going to help them or society in the long run. And I'm very conscious. I represent an area that used to have fantastic technical roots. We had Chatham Dockyard that closed in 1984, and to be honest, we've never entirely recovered from that. That used to provide, men and women with well-paid, fulfilling qualifications and careers for those who were, more technically minded as well as those who were academic, and my area is still sort of trying to recover from that. And because it is a Fabian audience, I will take the opportunity to be a little bit political here as a Labour MP, and say that I certainly see that jobs and opportunities, providing those for young people, is really key for the Labour government to tackling the sort of threat from reform and those kind of parties. A lot of think tanks are looking at correlations between support for parties like Reform, and there's some obvious elements, white working class, a low level of degree level attainment, and so it's not unreasonable, I think, for us to have a hypothesis that the lack of opportunities for those who aren't on a particularly university route does contribute to right-wing populism as much as concerns around immigration. And as a Labour MP, this is really my preferred route to tackling reform, showing that Labour is on everyone's side, that we are giving people opportunities, that we are putting more money in their pockets and giving them hope for the future. And before the general election happened, Keir Starmer, before he was Prime Minister, came to my constituency and launched his sort of technical opportunities for everyone mission at Mid Kent College in my constituency, and committed to putting technical routes on the same level of esteem as academic routes. And I think that was a really important political message to have delivered. But now we obviously are in government, we need to make sure that we're delivering on what that means for people in their everyday lives. And in terms of my reflections on the report, which I really welcome, and I find it hugely helpful to the debate that we're having around how we make this work, I think the report really delivers on things that businesses of all sizes in my constituency tell me they need to be able to engage with the apprenticeship system again. So as Joe mentioned, more flexibility. The government's already on that route with things like more modular based courses, which business has been calling for a really long time. And key, a simpler system to navigate. Smaller businesses are always telling me that they don't have the HR systems or the people or the time to be able to navigate the quite complex system that's in place at the moment for the apprenticeship levy. And large businesses, even big ones like Amazon, who operate in my constituency, do talk about the trapped capital that they have under the current system because of the level of restriction. They can't spend what they have available. And in terms of the particular recommendations that I welcome, I mean, the focus on being more strategic and aligning with the immigration policy and the industrial strategy is hugely welcome. I think it's really in keeping with the new government's approach to the economy in terms of driving economic growth, developing the skills of our workforce, and not really leaving things to the market as the Conservative government did previously. I would caution that we also need to think about those areas like mine where the drivers of the local economy, so in Kent, tourism, hospitality, they're not in those 8 industrial focus areas, but it was helpful obviously for Joe to talk about that more local involvement in the skills system, which I think is how we could address that problem. And in a similar vein, the targeted approach to those without degrees, I think it makes sense in a light of the significant evidence that a lot of the apprenticeship levy was going to people to get masters, for instance, or additional qualifications in areas where they were already qualified. And that's not necessarily where the labour market skills gaps are, and that's what we need to focus on, particularly when there's limited funds available to government. And we've seen government do that with a focus on level 2 and 3, which is a difficult decision, but I think one that is fair and stands up to scrutiny. I would say we do need to think about the implications for the green transition, though, particularly in areas like engineering, but there may be other suitable mechanisms where we can deal with that. And I particularly welcome making sure that all the money retained from the levy is actually being spent on skills. I was particularly shocked to learn that Treasury had retained 4.5 billion since 2017. I think that money should be spent on skills, surprisingly enough. And the report obviously is saying, look, we think that those big businesses who already pay should maybe pay a little bit more over time, and we should widen the scope of those who pay the levy. Now, obviously, particularly as a politician, I need to be mindful of the current quite challenging environment for businesses, but communication on this will be key. So demonstrating to businesses that this is really in their interests, which we know it will be in terms of productivity gains and the link to profitability. And I think the other recommendation to offer grants worth £3,000 for employers to invest in skills crucial to the growth sectors, and where there are skill shortages in the UK-based workforce, are also really helpful in that regard. But overall, I just think the report is really a detailed, helpful, pragmatic set of proposals that really helps to inform the government's thinking, and certainly something that I'll be drawing on as co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Skills, Careers and Employment over the next few months, particularly as we engage with ministers, with Skills England. We're currently conducting an inquiry into how we get the NEET rate down. It's currently almost at 1 million young people who are out of work and not in any form of training, which is really, really shocking, and why we need to move really quickly on this. And Youth Futures Foundation is involved in that as well, and we'll also be discussing the implications of the immigration white paper. So this report is very timely, very helpful for that work that we're doing. And then just a few comments on the urgency, really. I think we all sort of agree that we can't have economic growth being generated anymore from the City of London. If we're going to have economic growth in all parts of the UK and everybody to feel the impact of a Labour government, we have to make sure that those towns and villages, like the ones that I represent outside of city centres, see the benefits. And really, to deliver that, we must have a system, a skill system, an apprenticeship system that is going to work for all types of businesses. Medway is not unusual in having 90% of its businesses be SMEs, and we need to be really mindful of having a system that works for all sizes. I think the Chancellor has said herself that the growth rates are not where they need to be. It's a work in progress. Yes, we need to be fixing the foundations. The problems that we've inherited from the previous Conservative government in terms of our economy and our labour market are really, really significant. But we do also need some quick wins. We have achieved a lot in our first year in office, despite it not all being plain sailing. But it's really clear from the conversations that I have with people on the doorstep that people need to start feeling that things are getting better. So sort of quick wins, if you like. And we do need narratives that show who Labour is for when it is in government. And I think the recommendations in this report help hugely with that task. There are lots of good things that are happening at Skills England. I think it is a little bit of a black box for the broader business community at the moment. So we do need a greater clarity on things like the growth and skills levy to really help boost business confidence again and make it more likely for businesses to begin to invest in their people once again. It's in their interests, it's in broader society's interests. And, I think it's certainly a contributor to the productivity puzzle that everyone's been talking about for about over a decade in this country. Why is this? Well, I don't think the system has incentivized people to invest in their workforce for a very, very long time, and the recommendations will be helpful in dealing with that. And then if I may, just some final wider reflections on the skills system to sum up. As I mentioned before, 1 million NEETs makes this incredibly urgent as a project. We need to get that down, and the apprenticeship levy, which is largely targeted towards supporting young people, is the best way that we can really tackle that. We've had some fantastic news earlier this week from the government in terms of the technical colleges. So the government's now going to be training over 40,000 future builders, electricians at 10 sites across the UK, including one in North Kent, which I lobbied for, which I'm very pleased about. And this really builds on that 650 million that was announced a few months ago for construction jobs. We know that the government wants to build houses. It's a key manifesto commitment, and we aren't going to get there if we haven't got people with the skills to do it. The other thing I would just say is I think careers advice is really important. The government's got a big goal for itself in terms of overhauling that and joining it up more with Job Centre Plus. But we also need to get to kids much earlier, and we need to promote those technical routes so that people know that they can have a fantastic career and a long a career with a very decent pay, particularly if you look in the green industry. And young people particularly, because they do care so much about the environment, but they don't know how that can translate into them having a really good job. They don't know what a green job is or what a green skill is. And I think there's a really big piece of work for us to do around promoting that. And I also just think, reflecting on my feedback from the businesses that I talk to, we also need to tackle the work readiness of young people. I think the COVID has had a really detrimental impact on young people's social skills and expectations around what it means to be in work. And I think that's ripe for some targeted government intervention. And then just finally, I think, as everyone sort of recognises, skills really does underpin everything that the government set out in its manifesto that it wants to achieve. So the report that we're discussing today, and I really look forward to the contributions from the other panelists and the Q&A, it is really timely, and it has the potential to be hugely influential. And I'd just like to really thank the Fabian Society and Youth Future Foundation and CIPD for putting it together in such a coherent way and promoting having these kind of debates, because they're so important to the future of the country. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lauren. And sorry for interrupting your flow with my raised hand there. Apologies. So we're now going to go to each of the panelists who we'll be hearing from. After they've each provided some introductory remarks, we're going to be having a decent amount of time for questions and answers. So if you could be thinking about any questions that you want to raise, and if you do, you can either raise your hand and ask the question yourself, or you can just stick your question in the chat and I will put it to the panelists. So please do have a think about questions that you might want to ask about the research or the wider area of the apprenticeship levy, or any reflections on any of the contributions from our panelists. So first up is Barry Fletcher. So Barry is the Chief Executive of the Youth Futures Foundation. They're the What Works Centre for Youth Employment, and they kindly supported the research. So over to you, Barry.
Thank you very much, Joe, and good afternoon, everyone. Really good to see you. So firstly, thank you to the Fabian's team for all the work on this project. I think it's turned out a really interesting report. And as Lauren was highlighting earlier on, we've got nearly 1 million young people who are outside work or education at the moment. And the critical point there is that that's growing and unfortunately likely to continue to grow over the next few years. And we know that in most countries that are really successful in ensuring that they have really high participation in education and employment, apprenticeships play a crucial role in ensuring that's the case. And unfortunately, at the moment, as this report, I think, highlights really clearly, we've got the kind of opposite happening in the UK at the moment, where actually apprenticeships are becoming a smaller part of that solution rather than a bigger part of that solution. And that is ultimately the wrong direction of travel. At the moment, for 18-year-olds, only 6.5% do an apprenticeship. And that's out of a group around 60% who don't go to university at 18. And I think if you read our papers every day, you'd assume that pretty much everyone goes to university at 18 now, and the reality is that that's not the case. And actually, for a lot of those who go to university, that system works pretty well. But we know actually for that 60% who don't go to university at 18, actually that system doesn't always work very well. And one of the really important and evidence-led interventions that you can have is really high quality access to apprenticeships, especially for those at level 2 and level 3, and especially for those young people who might not have secured those qualifications at school. Now, of course, there are lots of trade-offs to be made in this, and I'm certain when we have the panel discussion later on, there will be really mixed views of how we take this forward. But I think what this report highlights is both some of the challenges that we currently have and gives, I think, some well-evidenced ideas of how that could be addressed. And we especially welcome, I suppose, that prioritization of young people, because we are probably almost unique in the world with our apprenticeship system in not prioritizing young people within that. And it's fair to say that the way that that system is structured at the moment, actually quite a lot of the incentives in the system, especially the incentives for employers, actually count against recruiting young people through it. And therefore, that is something ultimately that we think needs to change. Now, there is a sizable prize in addressing this that both gives more young people more opportunity, because what's great actually is that more young people want to do apprenticeships. That interest in apprenticeships has grown significantly, and I also think, and this is important when we look at it, it wasn't the focus of the report, but actually quality of apprenticeships in many cases has improved. There were lots of reforms that were done when the Levy were brought in that were also about quality, things like endpoint assessment, etc. And I think it's fair to say that there are some really high quality, excellent apprenticeships being done across the country at the moment. But because something's high quality, we actually want more of it. We don't want less of it. And actually what's happened is that quality has definitely gone up, but we have seen a decline in volume. And actually we want both. And we want both for young people, because ultimately we know that a lot more young people want to do apprenticeships. That the applications are high, there's huge amounts of interest, and that interest is actually growing all the time. So for us, it's about how do you make sure that you then can create those opportunities and make sure those opportunities are available for young people. And if we can address that, and we set our goal to try and get to the lowest NEET rate in the OECD, we think that would add around 69 billion to the economy and mean about 500,000 more young people would be employment and education. And that number is something I think that is achievable, but our apprenticeship system needs to be more focused on young people and give more opportunity to young people in order to meet that need. And that's something I hope that some of the recommendations that are in this report can help to do. So I'm going to end my comments there because I know we've got a lot to cover through. So I'll hand back to Joe. So thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Barry. So the next contribution is from Peter Chi. So Peter is the Chief Executive of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, CIPD, and CIPD were also one of the sponsors of the research. So over to you, Peter.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And it's great to be part of this event and part of supporting this really good report with the Fabians. The CIPD is a professional body for HR and people development, so we have a very large membership that covers all sectors. And of course, skills is a very important part of our agenda. So first of all, very supportive of the findings that you laid out very clearly, Joe, in terms of what has gone wrong with the levy in the past. And indeed, looking at it from the employer's perspective, we've seen this for quite some time. We've published some of our own research around what we felt needed to change in the levy a number of years ago, and it's certainly echoed many of the themes that we're seeing now. So it's good to see that with the relatively new government, that there is a real intent to address some of these failings, and it's very important that we do, because as has been noted, the fall in young people's apprenticeships, the not driving social mobility, and actually not really increasing skills investment in the right place, which is a very strategic and long-standing issue, all are of great concern. For employers, as I've touched on, they've raised concerns about the levy in the past as well. Apprenticeship works, but not in every circumstance. It does put an onus and some burden on employers in terms of the administration of these things and giving people time to do the training alongside the work. So there are challenges that have been raised by employers for some time. And the fact, as you touched on, which we've also seen, is that many employers were focusing the levy on their existing workforces. So an awful lot going on things like management training, which is not a bad thing, but we've always argued the management training line managers properly should be what every business does anyway. So the recommendations then, I think, are good things to be focused on. I don't think it'll surprise any of you listening in that they're not universally supported. When you talk about raising additional funds from employers, that won't always be greeted with great glee, as Lauren has already touched on. But I do think that we have to find ways to increase the funding, but then ensure that that funding is being directed in the right sorts of ways. And that's the really critical thing. And that brings me on to, I think, to sort of wider context stuff, because skills, I think, are not only fundamental to social mobility and giving people opportunities to work, they're fundamental to growth. And we've seen so many surveys, including our own, where businesses constantly saying that they can't find the skills that they need. Now, I think there are two responses to that. One is a comment I've often made, that employers can't always expect oven-ready employees, both out of education or anywhere else. And we do need to get employers to see that strategic investment in skills is part of what will help ensure their growth and productivity and sustainability for the long term. Because when you invest in your people, not only are you building their skills, you're also helping to retain their loyalty, and therefore, of course, helps with retention, engagement, and ultimately productivity very directly as well. So we do need a holistic approach to this. We've also long argued that skills policy has been too fragmented, so we certainly welcome the setup of Skills England. But as Lauren has already said, I think we're all asking the questions, okay, what's the agenda for Skills England? And we might hear a bit more from Fiona on this in terms of driving a more coordinated skills policy. Because the other thing that we hear so much from employers is they don't understand it. There are so many different initiatives. There are so many different acronyms. I was at a job centre up in the north of England last week with the employment minister, talking to many local employers there, and same comments coming through. And it was good, Lauren, to you mentioned things like job centres, because I think that is part of the wider agenda. How do we create these routes to work that support young people, that help local connection, particularly between employers, education, and indeed those who are not in education or employment, so the needs at a very local level. And job centres can be part of that, but we have to do something to rebuild the image of job centres, to create that better connection with employers and so forth. And that actually, to some degree, even applies to apprenticeships, because there are still some questions I think many parents have about apprenticeships, and parents are an important part of the equation in influencing young people in terms of their career choices going forward. We also very much believe that at the heart of the skills system, and that would include apprenticeships, because I think the other challenge we've seen with the employers taking a lead on apprenticeship frameworks the last 7 or 8 years, is that we have a proliferation of an awful lot of apprenticeship frameworks. And yet at the very heart of an awful lot of what we're now talking about are what are those essential skills that will apply across everything. And more employers, I think, talking about we need to recruit on attitude and aptitude. We need to understand the essential skills, the ability of people to communicate, to collaborate, to think critically. And all of that is becoming more and more true in a world where our whole future, what skills we're going to need and what jobs we're going to have, of course, is becoming under more and more question with the development of artificial intelligence. And AI is going to play a very profound role in everything from what we see as the jobs of the future to how we build skills better. And frankly, in many, not just in education, but also how we do learning within organizations, we need to reinvent. Lauren, you talked about some of the changes in education, more sort of micro-based, modularized learning. We need to do much more of that. And we need to ensure that, as I said, AI is supporting and enabling the learning journey, because it isn't just about entry. It's not just about apprenticeships. It's about ongoing learning as well, and lifelong learning, which we do not have a strong enough culture for that in this country either. And the role, therefore, of the employers, as I said, seeing that investment in skills is strategic. And of course, they should be not only encouraging apprenticeships and supporting them, and they definitely are arguing for the things that you called out, Joe, through the report, with greater flexibility in the apprenticeship levy, so more support for general training or internships, things of that nature, alongside apprenticeships. But they also, as I said, need to make it very clear that that's what they're committed to doing, to building skills. So we also believe that one of the things that we need to change is to have greater transparency. We talked about transparency for if this fund for skills development is going to grow, then we all need the assurance that it's being used in the right ways. But we've also, I think, got to find other ways to encourage employers to invest in skills. It's been a chronic and long-standing problem. We are way behind most of our international competitors and what we invest in our own workforces, and that has to change. So many of the recommendations in the report will help to drive that. But again, I think it's looking at this very holistically as well. So, as I said, it's great to be involved in this report. I think there are many things that we would echo entirely in terms of some of the things that need to change. I think, yes, absolutely, finding other ways to encourage greater investment, and then particularly, as has already been outlined, how we support smaller businesses and how we do this at a localized level, how we get stronger sector level understanding. And Lauren, you talked about, and rightly so, the sort of green and the energy sector, and there's been a lot of talk on that. We've also already talked about things like construction and healthcare, but we need this across all sectors, and there are already existing programs which we need to leverage more, some of which, of course, were introduced by the last government, such as the local skills improvement plans or the SWAPS program, which is the sector skills academies and the sector based work academies, which interestingly, we talk to many employers, they don't even know that those exist. So the existing system of funding through DWP and through job centres and other things I've already touched on, that needs to be part of the wider holistic approach to all of this as well. So as I said, we absolutely support and welcome this. My final point would be, and I know we're all asking for this, is clarity from government on the consultation process, which we'll all want to be engaged in, and the timeframes from that. But I certainly welcome the remarks from Lauren, and certainly what we've heard from government for a while now, that they're very open to the kinds of challenges that we've laid out here and the ways forwards. So thank you, Joe. Let me hand it back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Peter. So next up, we're going to go to Dr. Fiona Aldridge. So Fiona is the Chief Executive of the Skills Federation, and as well as that job, she's one of the new board members for the newly created Skills England. So over to you, Fiona.
Thanks, Joe, and congratulations on a really well-argued and powerfully evidenced report. Lots of food for thought there. I think in both my Skills Federation and Skills England role, a priority for me is about having a coherent national skills system that really takes account of the needs of sectors and of place, something that's accessible to employers and supports progression of learners, as previous panelists have talked about. So I wanted to reflect a little bit on the particular recommendations around sector and place, if that's okay with you. Skills Federation brings together a shared perspective of different industries on how the UK can develop workforce skills across the economy. My members are 18 sector skills bodies that cover 20 sectors of the economy, including the industrial strategy 8 sectors, directly representing 150,000 employers, but actually covering about 60% of the economy, which is about 1.7 million employers overall. And so, as you'll imagine, I'm a really strong supporter of the sectoral approach we're seeing in government policy through industrial strategy, through the mayor's local growth plans. And absolutely, we need to make sure that our skills policy really backs and reinforces that prioritisation, both for those 8 priorities, but also across the economy. So I was really pleased to see the recommendation and the recognition of the role that sector bodies can play in getting us to a skills system that meets our needs. Many of my members, and you reflect this in the report, were those sector skills councils, which were established in the last Labour government. And when they were defunded, some of them scaled back, some of them disappeared. But actually what was really important actually is for those that were remaining, actually the employers in their sector, in their industry said, no, we want you to play a role here and we will fund you to do that. So although they're different shapes and sizes, actually they're much more embedded in their industry and with their employers. And I think there's an important role for us to think about how government re-engages with them better, but actually I really wouldn't want to lose that being employer funded and being really embedded in their industry. I think it's Great to see the proposal around sector boards. I think that idea of having social partnership is really important. So we've got training providers thinking about how we deliver those skills. We have got unions involved as well as employers, but I think that employer involvement has to be really key so that they are articulating what their skills needs are, and then importantly thinking about what they need to do to both create the demand for those skills and use them really well. A great example is the Construction Skills Mission Board, which we've already seen, and actually 2 of my members, CITB and ECITB, are key members there. And I think these proposals also help us think about how we develop the trailblazer groups into something that's more fit for purpose for our current policy. I think your ideas around those boards setting standards, providing intelligence, prioritising public investment is really important, and I'd really like to see them as well just playing a key role in bringing employers to the table and thinking about how we maximise private sector investment. We've got some big figures about public investment, that's really hard, so we do need to think about how we maximise private investment too. I think there's other roles that they might play. Current members of Skills Federation also do things like professional registration and creating really effective progression routes through. So really important, and I think lots to build on and lots that we would be really supportive of. In terms of place, now my previous role before I joined Skills Federation, I was at West Midlands Combined Authority, and so it's great to see some really deep reflection on how we give local leaders a greater influence while still maintaining a national system. In the West Midlands, we saw and have seen apprenticeship starts fall, like we have seen nationally, particularly young people, particularly SMEs, and actually a 40% decline in engineering and manufacturing apprenticeships, which when you think about what the region is known for, and the fact that a third of all residents in the West Midlands Combined Authority are aged under 25, it's just shocking that they are our figures. It really limits opportunity and growth in the region. I think we have to be really careful, however, in thinking about meeting the needs of the place, that we don't create a more fragmented system. And I really like, therefore, your idea about taking a couple of strategic authorities and piloting what could be done. Because one of the great potentials of devolution is to be able to use it for test and learn. Does it work in this place? How do we make it work? What does that mean for the places? And what does that mean for our national system? One of the things that I was thinking about when we were in the West Midlands is thinking about our levy transfer pot. So the West Midlands trials the national apprenticeship levy transfer pot, but still has the regional pot. And actually that might be one of the ways in which government could sort of flex up the system to enable regions to innovate without over messing with, I suppose, the national system and creating unintended consequences. So thinking about how areas might use their levy transfer or other funds to be able to tailor provision to meet the needs of local growth plans, and also to create really effective pathways for young people and adults in their areas to be able to access apprenticeships is really important. Just thinking about place, though, I thought one of the gaps in the report that I'd really like to flag is the UK system. I know the report's focused on England, in part because the Growth and Skills Levy is focused on this area, but so many employers who are based across the UK actually say one of the challenges is the difference between the English, the Welsh and the Scottish system. And I think there's lots of potential through Skills England working with devolved nations and through taking a sector approach to also better meet the needs of the UK skills system. So a great report, and really happy to have the chance to engage in questions and further discussion. Thanks, Jo.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Fiona. So we're just about to go to our final panelist now. Just a reminder to pop any questions that you want to put to the panelists in the Q&A function at the bottom. So it should be just at the bottom of your screen. If you want to add any questions that you want to raise in there, that would be fantastic. So we'll now go to Holly Whittles. So Holly is the National Skills Policy Champion at the Federation of Small Businesses, which represents small and medium-sized employers across the UK. Over to you, Holly.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to speak. I think it's really vital that we all work together on this to help the future of our workforce, but also the economy, so we make that the Growth and Skills Levy work for everyone. As the National Skills Policy Champion for the Federation of Small Businesses, and I'm actually a director of 2 businesses myself in the West Midlands, I see firsthand the challenges and the opportunities facing small businesses when it comes to things like skills, training and apprenticeships. The apprenticeship levy hasn't really delivered on its original promise, and since 2007, as many people have alluded to already, the apprenticeship starts in small businesses have dropped by 50%. It's not just a statistic to me, this is a missed opportunity for thousands of young people and also small firms that are driving that innovation and growth in our communities. So the Fabian Society report is really highlighting this issue and it's proposing some really good solutions. So I was really pleased to see the support for the reintroduction of the £3,000 incentive for small businesses hiring apprenticeships under the age of 25. FSB research showed that 73% of small employers say this would actually encourage them to take on more apprenticeships. So this becomes a real tangible lever for change. But we must go further. So we need a system that works for small businesses and not just large levy payers. So things like protecting the government co-investment for non-levy payers, reducing the bureaucracy and the admin that comes with hosting apprenticeships. I've lost count the amount of different systems I have to log into, the portals, the bits of paper that seems to come with it. You know, we need to do better at reducing that. Funding short courses and foundational apprenticeships through the levy with equal access for small businesses. But crucially, something that I'm really passionate about is in getting that enterprise education into the curriculum and into schools to inspire that next generation of entrepreneurs. So I think Skills England is a real opportunity to help drive this change, but it must keep small businesses and the self-employed at the heart of that mission. So things like the local skills improvement plans have shown the power of employer-led insight. So we really need to build on that momentum. But we also need to build on the growing and evolving skills landscape with digital skills, soft skills, AI literacy skills, they're all becoming increasingly essential. Yet 46% of small businesses are saying their workforce lack the knowledge to use AI effectively. So that's a gap that we really need to close if we want to remain globally competitive. And lastly, let's not forget the human side of this conversation. So behind all of these statistics is a young person looking for a chance and a small business owner just trying to grow their company. So if we can get this right, we can unlock not just growth, but also opportunity. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Holly. So we're now going to go to some of the questions which people have popped in the Q&A, and thanks very much for all of your questions. Please do keep adding to them. So the first one I want to go to is a question from Emily Andrews, who I believe is the new Director of Policy and Research at Learning and Work Institute, which I think is Fiona's former role. So Emily says that the million-dollar question is, what alternative types of training might the new levy pay for, and does it already exist? And she asked the panel whether they have any thoughts on how we support the provider market to develop these courses where they might not exist. So Fiona, can I go to you first with this one? So obviously, as a board member in Skills England, it's that new organisation which will be making the decisions on what types of non-apprenticeship training can be funded through the levy. Do you have any views as to how these decisions should be made, and where there's a particular case for flexibility in other forms of non-apprenticeship training?
Yeah, thanks, Joe, and congratulations, Emily, on the new job. Hope you're enjoying it. It's a really important question, isn't it? And one that I think we really want to have the employer voice and those sector body voices in being able to shape what is needed in order to address their skills needs. I'm a massive fan of apprenticeships, but I think we'd be kidding ourselves if we thought that an apprenticeship was the skills solution for every challenge out there, particularly if we're thinking about reskilling and upskilling. Sometimes it's a much shorter course that bridges people from where they are now to where they need to be, particularly in the sort of changes we're seeing around technology and AI. Thinking about my role with some of the sector bodies, actually, energy and utility skills is a great example. They're thinking about how to get more people into sort of clean energy roles, and they've worked quite hard with their employers to think about what a sector entry package looks like. And it's there's a set of training, there's some other things around it. It's not always a full apprenticeship, particularly for young people. And then I think about what we we did in West Midlands Combined Authority, where we were really trying to get, for example, more young people into construction. And we said to employers, what do you need to get into this sector? What do you need to get on in this sector? And then we funded work around that. So we put together packages that really helped people progress and get great employment and earnings outcomes. And that's why it's probably best for people in Skills England sitting in an office not to come out with a list of things, but actually to talk to those sector boards with employers and training providers to work together to say what would make most difference in getting people in and getting people on, that serves the needs of that current role, but also enables career progression beyond that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Fiona. And then, Holly, if I could just put that one to you as well. So are there any particular types of non-apprenticeship training that your small business members would like to be able to use Levy funds on? Like, what's the driver of the sort of demand for more flexibility in the use of the Levy?
Yeah, one thing that FSB have done is a lot of research around this, and they found that 46% of their members are saying that they're lacking the knowledge, especially around things like digital skills. So I think that's something that we're sort of looking for as small businesses to help grow our businesses, help use things like AI and develop those entrepreneurship skills. We've spoken many times about the work ready, the right attitude, the life skills. And to me, part of that is basic digital skills. And quite often when you say this to government departments, they assume you mean coding apps and writing technical stuff. And actually, we don't mean that. We mean basic digital skills, being able to search the internet, refine queries, use things like Word and Excel and PowerPoint. To us, those are the basic digital skills that you need to be entrepreneurial to run your small businesses. So courses around that, those basic digital skills would be really useful.
Fantastic. And Peter, it'd be great to hear your reflection on this. So if you've got any kind of intelligence from your members on where the kind of priority is for flexibility, what are the other types of training aside from apprenticeships that your members would like to be able to use Levy funds for?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'd echo what Holly said. I think a lot of businesses are saying, look, we need these essential skills, but we need a consistent language. I mean, tech digital skills, I completely agree with your observation, Holly, that a lot of the talk when we said digital skills is we need to teach more coding. Well, interestingly, coding is one of those jobs that is already radically changing because of AI, notwithstanding the fact that wasn't what we were asking for. It's people's ability to interact with technology safely and so forth. So there's a sort of core set of skills, which I would argue need to be embedded in education and training of all forms. I mean, they are so essential to every job that we see now, both these behavioral and attitudinal things, employability skills, digital skills. And increasingly, and interestingly, Keir Starmer has announced this, that he wants to provide funding to train, I think it was over 7 million people by 2030 in AI. Well, that begs the question as to, well, what do we mean again? What are we talking about? What do we need to train people in AI to understand so that they're not left behind? So that's one area of focus that I think that we hear from a lot of employers. How could a skills system, and perhaps through the Levy and more flexibility, encourage the development of these sorts of skills? But I think fundamentally, 2 final points. One, there are a lot of accredited training programs out there, because the key point being, I suppose, that if you're going to allow organizations to access the Levy to provide other forms of training which aren't apprenticeships, formal apprenticeships, then there are plenty of accredited training programs through many different bodies and organizations which would provide the assurance, first of all, to the employer that they're using good training in all of this, but also to the rest of us to ensure that that money is being spent, hopefully, effectively. But my second point would be, therefore, I think this is a very important part of the consultation. As we talk to employers, they're keen to engage in this consultation. So what would help us most? They've all argued for greater flexibility, but I think to Emily's question, it begs that second question, which is, okay, but flexibility around what? We need to give some structure to this part of the argument as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Peter. There's just a couple of questions which I wanted to respond to briefly. So Jamie, Cater, and I think an anonymous question towards this, Patrick, sorry, both highlighted that the changes that we've seen in apprenticeship starts, kind of total numbers and the patterns of investment were in part due to the Levy, but also in part due to other changes that came in alongside the Levy, including the switch from frameworks to standards and things like the minimum duration and minimum requirement of off-the-job training. So I think that's a really important point, and one that we mention in the report. So not all of these changes can be kind of put at the door of the levy, which is a really important point. And there's another one which I think is a couple of people have raised a similar question, which I think is a bit of a challenge on the point about increasing and or expanding the levy. So an anonymous question says, politically, how could we manage expanding the levy when SMEs are struggling with rising costs, particularly national minimum wage and national insurance contributions? So I think just on this, I mean, the reason why we're looking at this is because SMEs have been badly let down by the current system, with starts falling by half, and because if we want to offer employers more flexibility in how the levy is used, we need more funding going into the pot. And we do in the report highlight the increased labour costs that businesses, including SMEs, have faced recently with the increase in national insurance and the minimum wage. So we argue that the threshold should be raised lowered gradually, and this done in consultation with employers. We also argue that even when the threshold's reduced, it would only be fewer than 1 in 10 employers paying in. And we think the ask of SMEs has to be reasonable. So we suggest a lower rate for medium-sized employers than large employers. And crucially, alongside contributing to the levy, we think there should be really generous support for SMEs to help them take on apprentices and invest in other forms of training. So rather than just requiring them to pay the levy, we are calling for £3,000 grants for SMEs taking on young apprentices, as the FSB have made the case for incentives for providers to support SMEs, to kind of hold their hand through the process, and also through locally provided business support for SMEs to help them understand the benefits of investing in skills, and to kind of talk them through the process. So hopefully there's a kind of balanced offer there for SMEs. So rather than just increasing costs, it is also significantly increasing support for them. We just had a question as well from Ben Rowland, who is Chief Executive of AELP, which represents the vast majority of independent training providers. So Ben says, with results day tomorrow, there's an emerging consensus that a large number of undergraduates do not get significant value from their university degree, but they do come out with high levels of debt. And there's also a high cost to the state in terms of tuition fees that won't be paid back. So he's asked whether we should look at redirecting some funding from higher education to the vocational education system. Lauren, I just wanted to come to you on this one. I just wanted to get your thoughts as to whether there is a case for this in a kind of era of quite constrained public finances, whether we need to look at the balance between higher education funding and technical education.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Obviously a hugely important one. I mean, I guess the broader issue that I have is I think that the higher education funding system is broken. So the new government has obviously allowed university to increase their fees in line with inflation, which they've not been able to do. But I mean, that's really quite a drop in the ocean in terms of the broader problems that we know that universities are seeing. I have 3 separate university campuses in my patch, and they are really key to my local economy, to be honest, and people doing well. So for me, it's not necessarily an either or. I think the point around rebalancing is a good one. I think that what the government needs to be looking at really is how we get a sustainable funding environment for universities. I think that, you know, one of the reasons that degree apprenticeships are becoming so popular is that issue of debt that you raise, that is putting off huge numbers of people from going to university, and they're saying, look, I can get one that's a bit, you know, something that's a little bit more linked to the job market, which is my aim, and I cannot have that debt around me. And you know, that's you know, driving people's behaviours in terms of further and higher education. I think that what we need is a system where we have an understanding of how both can contribute to what we need in terms of the economy and society. One of the things that I'm really proud of is that my local colleges and universities all work together. So they, in tight financial environments, are sharing back office services as much as possible. They are making sure they're not offering a similar course in terms of the university prospectuses. And I think that really is a bit of a model of where we need to go in terms of how the FE and the higher education sector work together. I think the rebalancing is needed, but I don't necessarily think it's that one area has got too much funding. I mean, they're in dire straits at the moment as well. I mean, what I would say is that for a very long time, as I alluded to earlier, universities have been the only show in town, and in some parts, that's unfortunately has been a bit of a legacy of the last New Labour government. We were quite rightly focused on making sure that everybody had the opportunity, if they wanted to go to university. But unfortunately, we were so focused on that it did kind of become the only show in town, and we had this sort of unintended consequence that the more technical routes weren't seen as a priority and weren't seen as more attractive. And there is a bit of a rebalancing in terms of culture. And I think in terms of funding, look, you are seeing that rebalancing in the way that the government's doing things. It's not necessarily taking money off universities, but it is directing the money that is available to rebalancing things. How much further that needs to go, I mean, is really a question for the broader government. But I think if I was a minister, I would be my priority would also be looking at how we get that higher education system on a more sustainable funding model, because at the moment we need both, and we need them working together, and we need that holistic and strategic look.
Thanks very much, Lauren. Barry, I just wanted to come to you on this one. So obviously Youth Futures Foundation sort of seeks to ensure all young people can achieve good work, but particularly young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. Kind of with that aim in mind, do you have any thoughts as to whether we have the balance right in terms of funding between higher education and further education route?
Thanks, Joe. So I think, look, we've got, some amazing universities in the UK. It's an area where we're continue to be world leading, and we shouldn't forget that when we look at these aspects. And lots of young people go through university and have excellent outcomes, and it's a critical part of both our economy and our skill system. But as I sort of said in my opening remarks, I think a lot of our focus in the system is on that part of it, both in terms of the scale of funding that's there, as well as I suppose, the policy emphasis on that in the system. And obviously we have a system as well where if you want to go to university and you meet the grade requirements, there is a place for you, and that will generally be funded by government through tuition fees. And as Ben highlights, a lot of those tuition fees don't necessarily get paid back. What I would argue for is actually, how do we ensure that young people have that choice? So, Lord Layard did a lot of work on this around the apprenticeship guarantee. So actually, we should guarantee that the young person, when they're making that choice about where they might want to do going forward, that you actually say, actually, we will help fund that. And that is, I think, a little bit what's missing in the system, because what that would do is possibly divert people away from university degrees that might be less beneficial to them. There are lots of, I'm slightly less driven by that, but I think that might do that. But it would also just give choice. And we know for a lot of young people, that choice doesn't exist because there aren't enough apprenticeship opportunities. So I think there is an argument for that, but I think that's about boosting investment overall, not necessarily taking a view that says it has to take one to the other, because actually we know we need more young people to be able to do those opportunities.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Barry. We had a question about how we can give devolved authorities a meaningful voice in shaping and maximising the impact of the new levy. Fiona, I just wanted to come to you on that one. Obviously, you mentioned your previous role at West Midlands Combined Authority. I wonder if you could say a bit more about how you think we could get that balance between local flexibility with locally elected leaders working with employers to ensure that the system kind of works for the local economy, whilst not having a fiendishly complex system with dozens of different levies across the country. So how can we strike that balance between local tailoring and simplicity across the UK?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And it is really important to get that right, because we've already seen examples of employers who can't get access to their levy, say in Scotland, and therefore don't train their workforce in apprenticeships across the whole of the UK. So it's really shooting ourselves in the foot. I think we have to, throughout the whole of devolution, be really clear about what you do once nationally, and then where you can use the power of local engagement and local influence and local tailoring to better meet the needs of places. So I guess some examples for me are about, often our young people are, they're embedded in local communities. Lots of them have their first opportunity with a SME, a local employer in a place. I think there's a really important role ensuring that we work with employers in priority sectors for that region, and that might be because it's a priority growth sector or because it's a high volume employment sector in that region, in being able to support and stimulate those employers to offer apprenticeships. We're seeing a really strong increase in demand for apprenticeships, but not always the match in supply. I think it's then making sure that those young people who could really benefit from apprenticeship are well positioned to access them. In the West Midlands, we developed something called Path to Apprenticeships, which very much supports young people to get some of those brilliant opportunities locally. So stimulating employer engagement, coordinating employers, focusing on local sectors and creating pathways. I think, as I said earlier, the potential of devolution for test and learn is really important too. So being able to work out and trial what might work in a particular sector, in a particular place, and for what sort of flexibilities might work in that place, is a really good way of trialing it before we make very big changes to a national system. But absolutely, as we evaluate things and identify where they work, we need to think about how we can bring them out nationally so that other young people, other employers get to benefit from them too.
Great, fantastic. Thanks, Fiona. And Fanny, can we come to you, Peter, on that one? It'd be good to get your thoughts, your views from your members in terms of how we can make the apprenticeship system and the skills system more broadly, both locally tailored, but also nationally coherent.
Yeah, I think the points Fiona make are absolutely right. I mean, we need a national framework, but within that, and this is always the challenge in any business, certainly in my experience, what you do collectively and what you allow to be more devolved, whether you're talking about business strategy to divisions or whatever it might be. But I think that's right. And I do agree with some of the comments also that Lauren made about higher education, vocational education, further education. We need a more balanced system, more integrated across those different dimensions, because whilst we've talked quite a lot about young people, the fact is we have a very significant number of people already in work, will be the mainstay of our workforce, or need to get it back into work, who will need upskilling and reskilling as well. And I do believe that a lot of that upskilling, reskilling, the lifelong learning that we talk about can be very well enabled through more local connection, through FE, which has been underinvested for far too long, and recognize that that is part of the system as well. And that also, I guess, speaks to one of the, or a couple of the questions which were raised about, is this, why wouldn't graduates be able to access some of this funding? And I think there's truth in that, because whether you're a graduate or non-graduate, and you're in the mid stages of your career, and then suddenly finding that the sector you're working in is changing or the job is changing, that you need upskilling and reskilling, then how do I access that? And I've always been a big fan. I mean, I think in other parts of the world, if you look in the Nordics, for example, they're very strong on cultures of lifelong learning. And in Denmark years ago, they talked about this flex security idea, flexible security. So recognizing that people would come out of jobs. Industry sectors and organizations will restructure, but then how do you provide the system to help people to adjust to that change and position them for their next role and opportunity? And we need employers to be part of that system as well. They've got to change some of their views that they often can be quite fixed in terms of recruitment. We've got to be more inclusive. And what I mean by that, when saying they're sometimes a bit fixed, is you hear an awful lot about either you've got all the experience and skills you've got that I need, or you haven't. I think we've got to be a little bit more flexible in that. We've got to be more flexible in the idea that I'm not just recruiting people in my sector. I can learn from other sectors, and we're going to see more cross-sectoral movement anyway. So as I said, I think it's looking at this educational system linked to training, not just for entry level, but lifelong, and then integrated into that, as we've already talked about, are things like careers advice and guidance, which don't just apply to young people. They're going to apply increasingly to older workers as well. So these are big systemic things that we need to, I think we've all commented on, that we need to think about quite holistically.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Peter. So that's all that we have time for, I'm afraid. So I just wanted to close by saying a big thank you to our excellent panelists. So to Lauren Edwards, MP, to Barry Fletcher, Peter Cheese, Fiona Aldridge, and to Holly Whittles. I wanted to say a big thank you as well to Youth Futures Foundation and to CIPD for making this work possible. And also a massive thanks everyone for joining us today and for all of your really interesting questions and comments. If you want to get in touch with us about the research, please feel free to do so. We are going to be, we're planning further work on skills policy and wider labour market policy as well. So if you want to get in touch with us about that, or if you're interested in partnering with us, please do reach out. And as I said at the start, Fabian Society is a membership organisation. So if you share our values and you're not already a member, please do feel free to join the Fabian Society. So just search online for Join the Fabians. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time, and I hope you have